Amy and Courtney from Forum, or Amy is now with Teoti, but she was with Forum One for this project. And I will turn this over to them, and they can dive into their design systems case study.
Great. Thanks so much, Jerry. So I wanted to actually start with a great quote from John Maeda. He produces the Design and Tech Report every year, he and his team. And it comes out every March. He usually presents it at South by Southwest. And this was a quote from 2017's Design and Tech Report. And it's very relevant because he was talking about how to scale your company's design function. And he specifically mentions that one of the ways to do that is by creating shareable design systems. So this was relevant. He highlighted it in March, and we're here to talk more about that and share our story about how we created a design system for our client. So first, who the heck are we? I'll introduce myself first. My name's Courtney Clark. I'm the managing director of Forum One. Forum One is a digital agency. We work mostly with nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, and we build and design really cool stuff. And we're also hiring user experience designers. So if you're looking for a position in Washington, D.C. or Seattle, please visit forum1.com. Amy?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Amy Binary. I'm an art director at Teoti Creative in Washington, D.C. And here at Teoti, we do a lot of websites, a lot of really great work for some commercial clients, a lot of nonprofit, a little bit of government. And we're also starting to venture into the Internet of Things and virtual reality space as well. But Courtney and I did used to work together, and we're going to talk about a project that we worked together in this presentation.
Awesome. So usually when we talk to folks about this, we like to get a sense of who you are, but I'm guessing that some of you in the crowd have probably used a design system. That's why you're attending this session. Maybe you'd love to learn more. And maybe you love it and you have a lot of experience, but we've also encountered people who are still not so sure about this whole design system thing. And I know that Amy and I can definitely empathize with that.
Yes, we sure can. I was definitely skeptical about the whole process, but as we'll talk about, I certainly, and obviously I've become a convert because here I am today.
Great.
So one of the questions we wanted to start with is just, how do you know if you need a design system? Maybe you're not sure, you're not quite familiar with what a design system is, or you're just not sure if it fits your particular project. So we just have a couple of questions that we kind of came up with based on our experience that, you might need a design system. We've been thinking of just kind of like, it's one of those things. There are 20 different button styles on your site. You might need a design system. I think we've all seen these websites or worked on these projects where your product or your site just has and touched by so many designers, and so you have so many different button styles or something else. So if that's the case, then a design system would definitely help you out. The second one is you have a lot of products, a lot of different sites that are all working together, or you're working on many different screen sizes. That's something where a design system is really going to help make your job easier. And finally, you have a lot of project sharing or handoff in your company or team, or if you even have a lot of turnover. Where it's a case where you're sharing projects and you're sharing designs, a design system is going to make it a lot easier for you guys to work together and to be able to pick up where somebody left off.
Great. So today we'll talk really briefly about how we're talking about a design system, and then we have a great case study to share with you as well to tell all the ins and outs of how we launched a design system for one of our clients. So first of all, we both work at agencies, and so groups hire us and we come in, and sometimes they're very sophisticated and they understand all the jargon and the language and know what they want, and sometimes they don't. So I always like to start with a little bit of an analogy to explain what a design system is. And I like to talk about tacos. So if you've been to Taco Bell for a late night treat, or anytime, I suppose, you'll notice that they basically have about 8 ingredients that they mix and match in their wonderful menu. So you've got your meat, your cheese, your lettuce, beans, salsa, tortillas, and sour cream. You can use this, they use the same ingredients to make a taco, to make a quesadilla, or to make a Crunchwrap Supreme. And basically they're relying on marketing and mixing and matching these same 8 ingredients. And I think that's a nice analogy when we talk about design systems, because we're designing the ingredients that then we can mix and match. And of course, there's always some variation in hot sauce, for example. There's many different strengths depending on how courageous or what you're craving. So, and that happens in design systems too. But this is kind of a really simple way that we like to use to explain what a design system is and what we're actually doing. We're creating and defining the ingredients, and we want to make sure that they fit together in many different combinations. I've also used the analogy of Legos, which is really handy. You know, there are different block sizes and colors, but they all still look like they're part of the same family when you put them together. Okay, so the case study we're going to share today is the case study of Peace Corps. So let me give you a little bit of background here. Peace Corps is a government agency. They brought in Forum 1, and they were creating a new brand. They were getting a new logo, and they had some branding elements, and they said, okay, we need to extend our new brand online. That's everywhere, the website, social media, many places. On top of that, you know, it was a new era for Peace Corps. They had, you can see the old site on the left, the older logo. They were ready for a refresh. They were ready to redesign their site. It'd probably been, I think it was like 8 years since they'd refreshed it. And you know, over those 8 years, technology had changed a lot. They're targeting a younger generation, recent college graduates, largely, to apply to Peace Corps. And so they wanted to freshen things up. And on top of that, the website is the primary place that Peace Corps applicants submit their application and get information to make that decision. So that was our task, was to redesign their digital presence, but also specifically, you know, the website, which was so vital. Here's a little bit of background on the project itself. The whole project was about 8 months long. We spent the first 2 months doing discovery, which included stakeholder interviews. We talked to a lot of recruiters who are on the front lines talking to potential applicants. Amy and I worked closely on the UX and design phase, which was 3 to 4 months. And then, of course, the development followed that. This is, you can see there's like, they don't all add up to 8 months. And that's because there was a good amount of overlap in the work that we did. It wasn't like we finished something and threw it over the wall. There was a good bit of overlap. Amy, could you talk a little bit about the team?
I would love to. So we had a rather large team, but given the scope of the project, that's not surprising, I don't think. We had 2 project managers, 2 UX designers. We had Courtney working on it and an associate as well. We had a content strategist. We had a visual designer, myself. And we had a huge team of developers. We had over 5 backend developers. We contracted with a company in Blacksburg, Virginia. And then we had 2 front-end developers as our main folks, and then closer to launch, we had, I think, at least 6 working on this at the same time. It was quite a large project team. But to complement that, we also had a large client-side team as well. There were 2 product owners who are our main points of contact, along with the executive director of the Peace Corps. They have a communication staff over there of over 10 people. They have 2 developers on their end, an analyst, and over 200 content authors. And just to throw something else into the mix, they're located in 60 different countries and across 15 different programs. So it was quite the teams coming together to make this happen. It was a really big effort on both sides.
And these are the tools that we used to coordinate with folks to get all of that work done. We used UXPen for our wireframing and prototyping. Amy worked in Photoshop and InVision to create the comps. We mentioned there were many content authors. We used Gather Content to get content written early once we had defined our model and our page structure. We use Zoom, which is what we're on right now. Our team was spread across the country and across the world in many cases. So we relied on Zoom for video conferencing. For the pattern library and design system development, we used Pattern Lab. Our front-end developers worked there. And the content management system is Wagtail, which is based on Django. So that gives you hopefully kind of an overview, setting the scene, who we worked with, the tools we used, and the time it took. Now we'll talk to you more about the process and the nitty-gritty of actually getting that design system going. So I'm going to brush over this, but it needs to be said that we spent a good amount of time on discovery. We held several workshops. We talked to many stakeholders within the Peace Corps, and also, you know, they had done, luckily the branding group had done a good amount of research on the audiences that we were able to use. So that, I want to make sure we emphasize that there was a good amount of time spent on that before we, you know, put pen to paper or got out UXPen. We did go through wireframing. I think one thing that was really vital to our success is that we started with, you know, basic block level wireframes and then moved to more detailed ones. But Amy and I were in lockstep at this phase, defining the goals, the audiences, and the actions for every single page we did. We wanted to make sure we were designing with purpose and optimizing key pathways that we'd identified. Okay, so now imagine we've fast forwarded ahead 4 months, and now it's time to start talking about this design system.
Yeah, a lot of stuff happened between then and the visual design system, but just to get to the meat. So we wanted to talk about what our ingredients were, if we continue with that taco analogies, you know, what is our tomatoes and our lettuce and all that. So the design system, you know, everybody kind of talks about it a little bit differently. But the principle is the same, I think, in every case. You know, you start with your most basic elements, and then you move up the scale into increasingly larger pieces. And this was the terminology that we used for our particular project. We had basics, elements, building blocks, and pages. That's kind of the spectrum of items that we used. But starting with the basics, so as Courtney mentioned, they had a brand new logo, and along with that came some brand guidelines developed by Ogilvy. And essentially they handed us a color palette and they handed us a typography choices. And what we had to do is kind of go from there. So they gave us these lovely patterns, some really great icons. And so we developed our basics, which were things like our color, our typography styles, our icons, patterns, things like that, both for desktop and for mobile. And then the next step up from there, we had our elements, which, you know, they start combining basic pieces into various elements. And at this stage, you know, you're putting together your puzzle pieces starting to be formed. And so this is things like buttons, your forms, and again, that's for desktop and for mobile. And this was kind of the part where we started introducing our developers into the process, so we could talk about things like hover states for buttons, or, you know, what's happening to the form when you start typing into it, the label jumps to the top of the form, that kind of thing. So we started working with our developers very early in the process. And then the next step up from there is our building blocks. So once those other two levels are set, we start combining even more elements to put our building blocks together. And those are things like calls to action. We use these stat boxes, which you can see on the left throughout the site, just to kind of give a little bit more information to each of the page. And this shows you how we use variation within our various building blocks, kind of like Courtney was talking about those hot sauce flavors. So for this one, we have, you know, 3 different types of stat boxes and 4 different types of calls to action. They're all clearly part of the same family and part of the same system, but, you know, it just moves around a little bit. Maybe there's a button, maybe there isn't, maybe it's green, maybe it's blue. There's a little bit of variation. And that continues as well with things like listings, and related content that was on the site, which you see listed here. Again, all kind of part of the same family clearly, but they're all also very clearly different pieces of content. So you have a volunteer opening that's going to look a little bit different from an event title, but they're very clearly all Peace Corps. And then the final step of building the system is, of course, your pages. And I mentioned before, I was kind of skeptical about this whole process, and that was because I thought that this phase of the design process was going to go away. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but as a visual designer, this is always my favorite part, you know, designing full page comps to show your clients. And I was worried that that was going to go away if you designed a system, but I discovered that, you know, it's not necessarily going to go away because, well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I haven't met a client yet that's probably going to approve a design system without seeing the full page comp. Maybe that's coming, I don't know. But also you need to see how your different building blocks are working with each other. You can't just slap them on the page and necessarily expect them to work. You have to know what your spacing is going to be, what the rhythm of all your building blocks is going to be. So you really do have to lay it out on a page to get the full picture. And you can see here, this is one of the country pages on the Peace Corps website. And we've kind of designated with these little black bars each building block that is on this page. So it's a combination of 8 different building blocks that have come together on this one page. They're very cohesive. And it's just a really lovely page that works really nicely in its rhythm and its visual appearance. So that's how our building blocks and our pages worked. And then, to even put some more variation on it, we looked at color palettes changing actually within the site itself. So these country pages, there's 60 different countries that the Peace Corps works in, and they all want to be different and a little bit special. So we offered them, I went through actually really did this in a comp. I took every flag of the countries that Peace Corps works in, I put them all in an Illustrator document, and I sorted them into common color palettes because there's only so many colors that flags use. So we came up with these 6 options that the countries could pick based on the colors of their flag, and it would change different elements based on the color palette that they chose. For instance, this quote in the right-hand corner is blue in certain cases where it's normally navy. So that's how we even developed our design system as we were working on it. We evolved it even more.
And I would add that this sort of providing this structured variation made the project pretty successful because historically the countries had the ability to create whatever look and feel they wanted to or structure. And so because we were standardizing it with a system, we also didn't want them to feel too constrained. And so you can see that there are 4 options. They're still a part of the same family, but it's in a more constrained way. So providing that flexibility and options was really key into getting approvals and getting many stakeholders excited about the new design system. So kudos to Amy. I saw the document with all the flags on it, and it was a sight.
Yeah, and we tried to find it for a screenshot, but couldn't find it.
I know.
It's a shame.
So we'll talk a little bit about what made that process successful for us. The first one was Power Jams. Power Jams is a fancy word for daily meetings. Here's our team on a Zoom video chat. One thing that we did was, from the beginning, we created a Power Jam every morning for an hour. And it started as just Amy and I tackling down the pages and the structure and then moving into design. We would do one page at a time and then reflect on that work. Everyone was invited though. So we would have our front-end developer who would pop in and listen, or our project manager. It was also a centralized place where our team could always get a hold of us and make sure they could ask us questions. We of course had like hip chat or a group chat where that could happen as well, but sometimes it was just easier to share a screen and talk. So having that regular daily meeting that anybody could jump in on really made our group successful.
Mm-hmm.
The next one was just the amount of preparation that we did. That goes for design reviews, the preparation we did there, So providing like a narrative around what they were looking at, what we were showing, and what it meant. Content preparation, I mentioned gather content. I find that one of the biggest reasons why products launch late is because content isn't ready. So we got out ahead of that and made sure like all the content on the site was rewritten pretty much. And we're talking about, it started at 20,000 pages. So that was a big deal. And then Amy was so organized in the design inventory. This is just a quick screenshot of that Google Doc. Amy, could you talk us through what this document is and why it was useful?
Yeah, this was an extremely valuable tool, not only for myself, but I hope for the team too. So this was a way for me to organize what work I needed to do, what work I had done, and where it lived. So I essentially entered in all the pages that were in the sitemap that we would be working on. I talked about the priority that they were, if these were one of the top level pages that we needed to get done in the first couple of sprints to make sure that the client saw them soon for all those approvals that they had to go through, or if it's something that we could concentrate on a little bit further down the line. And then links to the wireframe as we created it, whether it was approved or not. And then the location for all the files and the tickets, the development tickets as well. And what that did, you know, as much as I love getting chats from the developers asking me where files are, I'm happy to answer them. But this was an easy way for me to share this document with them. And so that if they weren't sure where a design was or weren't sure where the ticket was, it was all available in one central location. And I think it reduced a lot of back and forth between myself and the development team to make sure we were moving forward in an efficient way.
Absolutely. And then finally, there was a certain amount of luck here. We were really lucky enough to work with an amazing client who was very involved in the process and was really excited to jump in and was getting us the answers that we needed to keep us moving quickly. Plus, they were just awesome people who were fun to be around. And I don't know how you plan for that, but so I just wanted to acknowledge that we worked really well as a team because we all liked each other, which is a great thing. So that's notable. I don't know how you recreate it.
Yeah, just work with really great clients and your life will be so much easier.
Yeah. I think we also have some lessons learned, and we'll talk a little bit about what happened after launch. But the immediate lessons learned are listed here. Amy, did you have some additional thoughts on what's
this was something that Courtney and I, when we were done with the process, we kind of reflected back on some things that we wish we had done better. You know, one thing was to start earlier. And as I mentioned, like I was skeptical about the design system thing, and then I was doing all this work and not even realizing that that's what I was doing. I was actually designing the design system without having meant to. And it turned out that it was the perfect application for this particular project. But had I known that that's what I was going to do, I would have started a lot earlier in the process and done it a little bit differently with our strategies about how to approach the design. And another couple of things we learned, this is to outline the rules as you go. There are rules to design system. For instance, for the Peace Corps project, we only use the color red in reference to application processes. So anytime the red was used, that was clearly application. We never actually wrote that down anywhere. So when it came time for me to leave Forum 1, I had to kind of tell them that because I had forgotten to write it down somewhere. And then the third thing is to choose a home for it, for your system. You know, you need to know where the final version is, you know, whether that's in your Photoshop or your sketch files, or whether that's actually live in Pattern Lab or whatever code that you're using to build your system in. You just need to know which is the final version and where folks should start from if they're going to work on evolving your system or just work on your system at all. So those are just a couple things that we'll talk about a little bit more, but these are some lessons learned along the way for you.
And Amy, there was a question that popped up. I saw that where somebody asked the difference between the flat file and the approved file here. Could you talk about that?
I sure can. So the flat file is just that. It's the the flat JPEG or ping of the image, so that if somebody just needed to reference something really quickly and didn't want to download a huge PSD, they could just pull up the flat file, and that's going to be a lot faster. The approved files are actually the full layered Photoshop documents or Sketch documents, if that's what you're using, for the developers to pull down and actually pull assets from. So that's the difference there. It's a good question.
Great. And then one more question was, how do you keep elements, building blocks, and pages within the design system up to date when the basics change?
That's an excellent question. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but sometimes it does. I don't think there's a perfect way to do a design system, whether it's Photoshop or Sketch. I know UX Pen is starting to delve into that as well. But hopefully the way that you build the system is in such a way that using smart objects or however it works in Sketch. I still haven't used Sketch yet. I'm working on it. Things that you can quickly update elements just by changing a color swatch so that it changes everywhere. It depends on what you're using to build your system in.
Great. I see a few more questions popping up, so I'll get to those as well. One was, did you design the pages in Photoshop and then bring them into UX Pen? No, we started in UX Pen with just wireframes, and then Amy moved into Photoshop to create the designs. From there, we presented them using InVision.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then how long did it take to develop this design system for Peace Corps? I think we said at the beginning the UX and design process was 3 to 4 months. Amy, do you have a sense of the design system itself? It was kind of ongoing.
It was, just because, like I mentioned, that's not exactly how I started out. So the overall design portion, I believe, was 6 weeks. The system itself was probably maybe 4, or even less than that, actually, because once it was built, as we'll talk about, things go a lot quicker. But yeah, once you get it down, it makes things a lot faster, but at least a couple of weeks to build it up in the beginning.
Right. Fast and furious.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was fast, but so we started the project 8 months later. We launched in June of 2016, and it's still ongoing. We continue to work with Peace Corps and help them extend their system. And some things come up. There were some parts of the site that we still needed to work on. There were some adjustments that we made. And so here are some of the things that we encountered after the design system came into the world. One was, we have these styles. So what happens when you create a new page and you're like, oh, none of these styles really work? Or you have a stakeholder who says, no, we must have something special, something new. Well, I have a couple of questions that I always ask when we're encountering that situation. The first question is, what already exists? What do we have that we can use? Amy had built out a beautiful and robust design system. There was a lot of stuff in there that she had planned for that hadn't necessarily been used on pages yet. So it was always good to go back and reflect on that. Oftentimes, there were styles that we could use. If not, the next question is, what is the significance of the new item that you want to add, whether it's a button style or some sort of listing style? What is the significance to your audience and to the goals of your business or your organization? And why is it so important that it has to be different, that we can't use something else? That's a hard question and a hard conversation to have, but I totally recommend reflecting on it. The final question, if it doesn't exist, if everybody says this is so important, we got to do it, the final question is, how will it be used again in the future? The benefit of a design system is reuse. That's why you're doing it largely, is because you can gain efficiency by reusing these elements. If it can't be reused, I would really question the need for it. And that's kind of the trick and the challenge in an ongoing way, is how do you guard that system? Because as soon as you start making caveats and adjustments, it can unravel really quickly. And so that's why Amy said earlier, you know, writing down the rules and the reasoning for some of the decisions you made is so vital, because you're going to have other team members using it. You may, you know, maybe your whole company will use it eventually. So conveying that understanding is so vital. And we actually, you know, had a new designer come in to help us on the project, Sarah Coles, and there was a handoff that had to happen where Amy, you know, broke down the rules and what had been created. And she said once she got the overview and really understood the genesis of that design system, it was pretty easy to extend over time. So we do have coming up a couple of slides on why we think design systems are great, and then a little bit about how to get buy-in into design systems as well.
Yeah. So we kind of think there's there's a lot of reasons to use a design system, but the three big ones that we would recommend if you're trying to get some buy-in from the higher ups about why it's important, these are some ones to hit on. We have scalability, consistency, and efficiency and teamwork. So when we talk about scalability, you know, that's part of the title of our presentation today. It's really important. And that's one of the biggest benefits that you can see, especially on large products or large websites. You know, using a system that allows you to build it out quickly and infinitely can be just so valuable. The biggest benefit we saw was that, you know, even though it was a little bit slow in the beginning when I was, you know, starting to design the basics and the building blocks, once you have set that into stone and you have your design system, you could start putting together pages in no time whatsoever. We developed 29 unique page templates for this project, which is insane. That's more than I've ever done before or since. But, you know, the first 5 or 6 maybe were a little bit slow going as we started to get approvals and evolving everything. But once we got to 28, 29, it was taking 15 minutes or less to put these pages together. And it would continue to do that the bigger the site became. And then, you know, kind of hand in hand with that is consistency. You know, this is kind of obvious, but it's worth repeating that, you know, if you're working on an established system that's been carefully designed and planned out, it's kind of easy to ensure that your site is pretty consistent because you're using the same colors and the same basics throughout, which is going to make it really easy to stick with your brand, which was particularly important for the Peace Corps because this was a brand new brand for them, and we wanted to make sure that it was very clear what this new brand was and what it looked like. So it was particularly important for them to have a really consistently designed website. And finally, efficiency and teamwork. You know, teamwork makes the dream work, as I like to say. So we've discovered that using the design system pretty much makes everybody's lives a little bit easier. And that starts from the UX designer all the way through to the developer, and even for the client too, because they're going to start to understand that we're working a lot faster and saving them money. So the UX and design teams can work really close together. And then this is a quote from our excellent front-end developer lead on the project. He was just so excited to see us using the design system. Because developers, you know, not to generalize too much, but they tend to think in systems anyway as they're building a site for maximum efficiency. So the fact that we were doing that as well is just making his life so much easier.
Right. And actually, there was a question about how we managed handoffs to the development team and maintained that consistency.
Yeah.
Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Courtney mentioned, we would have those daily power jams, and we would, of course, invite the developers to that, and they did join for a lot of those. So the handoff wasn't necessarily like one big event where we said, you know, we have handed you the system, go forth and build. It kind of happened, you know, over the course of a couple of weeks where we're starting to explain the basics to them, and they build those, and then we explain the elements to them and they build those, and so on and so forth. But they were essential to the process, and the handoff was more just walking them through each of the designs and pointing out the different pieces that we were working with. And one thing that we did do that I believe we mentioned a little bit later is we all used the same language. And so that's another part of the consistency benefit of a design system. If you're all calling, you know, a call to action instead of a block with a button, it becomes a lot easier because you're all using the shared language of the system, and there's no question about what elements you're talking about when you say a call to action, because everybody's clear on what that is, from the client to the product team itself.
Right. So to add a little bit more detail, before the client ever saw a design, we would review it with our developers. Once it was approved by the client, then Amy would hand off the Photoshop file to our developers. Is that right, Amy?
That is correct. Yeah, with the handy dandy spreadsheet, I would start putting in the links that they could start following.
That's right. Great.
So those were our three big benefits to using a design system, in our opinion. There are a lot more, but these are the big ones.
Yeah. Cool. So how do you get buy-in? We sometimes are entering teams or organizations where they may not have heard of a design system before. They may not have gone through a redesign of a product before. So there's a certain amount of education that sometimes has to happen, but also just catching them up on what we're about to do for the next few weeks. Again, I'll come back to this excellent John Maeda quote. When he sent out the Design and Tech report, he talked about this. There are a couple, he actually had 4 points talking about how we can scale design more rapidly, and especially because there's so much design debt in tech right now. There are a lot of gaps to fill, and design is really a big differentiator in products these days. So designs, I often start by talking about, this is the mode of the future. There are organizations and businesses that are already doing this, and for your product to scale, this is a vital and tested approach. So I often start there. The second thing that I often talk about is what they're getting out of their investment, their return on investment. With a standard traditional process where you're designing page after page after page, the investment just continues to increase. There aren't necessarily efficiencies to be gained. The benefit of a design system, like Amy said, there's a lot of work up front to define the basics and the elements and so on. And we saw this, and we continue to see this on our projects. Once there's a point that you hit where you have enough of those elements and blocks defined that you can put together pages and examples super duper fast. Amy, I think you were putting together pages in like 5 or 10 minutes at a certain point, right?
Sure was.
That story is very compelling, because what that means is that our team is able to work faster and more efficiently with a design system. And who doesn't like to save time and money? I think the other thing that I often talk about is that the design system is valuable to all team members. Amy mentioned the consistent branding and look and feel is really valuable to your marketing team and teams that care about branding. It's great for project management. They know what to expect, and they're always keeping a close eye on the schedule and the budget, and design systems have proven to keep us very efficient. Governance is huge too, because we start to define how things work and what the thing's going to look like pretty early on and how it will function. And you should be starting to define those rules a little bit earlier on. Whereas if you do it after launch, there's a lot of work to be done still. So that's valuable. And Amy mentioned, our front-end developers are already thinking in a systematic way. So of course, it's so great when the whole team is thinking in a systematic way. It makes everyone's job a little bit easier because we're using the same language and the same approach. So what about our clients? How do we talk to our clients about this type of stuff? So I mentioned, there's a little bit of education that has to happen. Letting the taco example I use a lot, or like Legos, telling them what's about to happen, what to expect. Case studies are great. We hope that you can use this case study to share with your team or your clients. And then we try to share our approach along the way. There are a lot of moving pieces. I know that Amy moved between the basics and then full page designs a lot in those initial couple of weeks to get to a more finalized place. But when we presented the pages and the pieces, we started using the language and say, like, this is part of the design system. Even just using that phrase, so they're getting familiar with it. And then pointing out the patterns that we're using and the benefits of those patterns was really, really helpful. Amy, are there other things you would add that you try to share with your clients?
Yeah, I think it's important just to start from the very beginning. If this is a strategy that you're going to use, like Courtney said, start talking about it really early, explain to them what it is, and then bring them along the journey with you. If you can communicate the value of your approach, you're going to gain more trust from your clients. So just a lot of communication along the way, and that'll go a long way with your clients, I think.
Yeah. So we do have a couple of tips, and also are really happy to answer your questions. This is advice that we give to our internal teams, but also to you all, and we're eager to hear how you're doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. But we just have a few that we, again, on reflection of the process, what have we learned that we can impart to you? The first one is, of course, to be consistent. We've already talked about that a little bit, and that's things, that's talking about the way that things are set up, what they're named. Be consistent how you're setting up your files and how you're naming things to make sure that everybody who's looking for a file knows where to find it and is not surprised by a sudden change in your naming convention. But we did that, naming our things very clearly and, labeling them within our system itself. So for example, the gray box list, everybody knew what we were talking about when we talked about the gray box list, which may not mean anything to you guys. But if you look on the Peace Corps website, you'll see some of these guys. So the consistency will lead to really big wins. The next thing is to be organized. This comes more easily to some than others. I happen to be a hyper organized person, as you saw from that spreadsheet. But that there is a benefit to being really organized and being very detailed. And again, that's naming your files the same thing. And again, making sure everybody knows where you keep your files. And that's not only for your own benefit and for your team's benefit, but in the case where, I ended up leaving the company, it was a lot easier to hand off all these elements and assets because I had kept them really organized. So you're benefiting folks in the future as well. So this spreadsheet and its ilk were big wins. We discovered how to do transitions. I hope you guys like them. The next one is to communicate. This was essential for our own process just because we had team members and clients all over the country and all over the world. There was no way to get around communicating well. So it's, talk to your team members, keep them updated of what you're doing, bring in the developers early in the process, and bring your clients along the journey with you, and you're gonna set yourself up for a lot bigger success. You should get to code as quickly as you can. How quickly you can do that is up to your individual product and team, but that's where you can really test things out and perfect your design system. So the quicker you can get it there, the better your product is going to be, because that's going to be where you're testing it and where you're QAing it. And this is just a screenshot from the tool Pattern Lab that we used, where we essentially built our entire system. Yeah. So getting that done early is even better.
Totally. And there was a question around static page comps. And the question was, are they absolutely necessary versus, getting into the code and developing the HTML prototypes? And I have a thought. The page comps were so helpful because Amy could move quickly and create the whole page. But once Pattern Lab caught up and our front-end developer had a lot of the components built out, he was able to assemble pages even faster than Amy was. So once you have the foundation set, we're actually to the point where we can assemble pages very rapidly, and it's mostly like wireframe, assemble in Pattern Lab, our design lead QAs it, and it's up and ready for review.
Yeah. And to answer the question that just came in, I did not stick to any baseline grid system. That's something that I'm doing more now in my process, but a couple of years ago, that wasn't part of my process. So it was just a basic 12-column grid that we were working with, but not a baseline grid. And the final thing that we would recommend, we've mentioned this already, but it is really important. Decide on the afterlife for your design system. When it came time to start phase 2 of this project, it turns out that the final version of the design system was in Pattern Lab, and I hadn't gone back into Photoshop to make some of the changes that we had made during the QA process. So when it was time for me to hand off the files to the designer that was taking over, we kind of had to scramble a little bit to let her know that, oh wait, these aren't actually totally correct. You need to be looking at Pattern Lab. So it doesn't matter where you keep it, it's up to you. Just keep it somewhere and make sure that's clear to everybody on the team that that is the final version. It's definitely a lesson learned.
That and to refer back to the elements you'll create. In our case, there were a lot of elements that Amy had designed and that we planned for in our UX and design process that didn't get launched immediately or weren't used on pages. So the other advice is like, keep that design inventory and make sure to refer back to it. We're still finding excellent nuggets that Amy had designed that we can use and adjust for.
Yeah. And just the message overall is that there's a huge benefit to the design system because it's going to free up your time to do other cool stuff. Like you have bigger fish to fry. You have stuff that you need to do. That you're, if you're not working in a system, you're taking so much time doing all these page comps, you're not going to have time to do cool stuff like 404 pages and preloaders, which we did have the time to do on this particular project. I think it's taken a while to load, but we have a preview of the 404 page, which I was super jazzed about because I'd never gotten to do one before and I'd always wanted to. And because I had worked so efficiently in the design process, while they were coding away, I had time to go back and build a really cool 404 page and a preloader, which is also fun. Because it's those things that really make your website special, those little moments of delight, as we like to call them. When you can build those in, you know you have a really special project because at the end of the day, who doesn't want more delight in their project or their product? I venture to say nobody. So I think that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much. I think we have some time for some questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job, Courtney and Amy here. I'll just do some quick little announcements and then we can dive right into the Q&A here. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And for folks who may have joined later, and this is the first webinar that you're joining, we are UX Pins, so we are a full stack UX design platform, and we support design, prototyping, design systems, generating developer documentation, and automating developer handoffs all in one platform. So we are an end-to-end design tool, essentially. And if you're interested in checking us out, we do have a free trial, and I've dropped in the link there. Otherwise, we can dive into some of the Q&A here. So the first question was, how did you document different UI states? So for instance, like a hover state.
Yeah, that was something that I documented alongside each of the different elements. So for example, the buttons, I would show in Photoshop, and again, this isn't probably the best way to do it, but this is how we did it at the time. In Photoshop, I would have the standard button the way it is just normally on the page, and then next to it, I would have the hover state for the button. And in between, we would talk to the developer about exactly what that transition is going to look like and what the animation is going to look like, what the behavior is. So the documentation was to have them side by side, and then it was more of a discussion with the developer about the actual transitions themselves.
Yeah. And examples are really key too. There are a lot of places where we pulled inspiration, like how forms worked. And so if we could pull up a live example, we would add that to the documentation because sometimes it was just easier to let them interact with it and look at it there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And the next question is, around metrics. So what metrics did you use to measure success, either qualitative or quantitative, for the design system?
Great question. So, oh man, where to start there? We just had a great meeting with the Peace Corps team to reflect on, it's been a little over a year. How are things working out? There are a couple of things we were looking at. One is how rapidly we're able to move when a new section needs to be created or when something needs to be updated. So we're measuring ourselves against how efficient and quick we can be in that way. It was really obvious from the beginning that the design system helped us move faster, use less hours. So that's one thing. We want to make sure we're very efficient for our clients. The second thing was that we had a lot of stakeholders that we wanted to be not only happy with the product, but also excited about it. One of our goals during the whole project was, when you look at this, do you feel inspired? Does this inspire you to want to apply? Not only but for stakeholders to be inspired, but also for potential Peace Corps applicants. And one of the things that we've heard is that, the web team is getting fewer requests than complaints from, like other content authors. The content authoring process is faster. And that is contributed to from the structure that we developed, how it's developed in the back end, but also the design system, how it looks and how they're portrayed and how they're able to enter that content because it represents, their country office, for example. On the quantitative front, at Peace Corps, they have an analytics lead who is measuring the success of campaigns, looking at, how many applications are coming in. They manage that part and have numbers there. I'll leave it to them to decide what they want to share. I can say, though, that there has been success in the initial launch where they did see great traffic and feedback after the launch. And that's not just, there was a lot of people involved. It wasn't just the design system, but the design system was certainly part of it.
Right. And the next question is, can you elaborate more on the governance that you mentioned earlier? When you both can't be involved with design and development, what QA was set in place to ensure that design standards aren't deviating too far from what was in the design system?
Amy, do you want to talk about QA you did during the project?
Sure. Yeah, we did say at the beginning that this was a large project team, but it also, I think probably in comparison to some other companies or other project teams, it wasn't that large. So I did have my eyeballs on every single page and had the ability to QA along the way. And I think that's really important because as great as our developers are, sometimes things like spacing or line height, things like that, sometimes slip through the cracks. So essentially what we would do, they would finish building a page or they would put something into Pattern Lab, just one of the building blocks for me to look over. And then we would go back and forth on tickets and just talk about what needed to be changed. I used the inspector in Chrome a lot to give them some guidance so they're not guessing on things. But in our case, we did have the ability to kind of QA every single page that we worked on. That may not be the case with everybody, so I would recommend using something like a Pattern Lab where your design system is all in one spot, making sure that that's absolutely 100% perfect, and that's going to go a long way to make sure your website or your product is following the design system well as they build out. But try to get your eyeballs on as many pages as you can.
Yeah, and then after launch, we still have a team who's managing it and overseeing the updates. The great news is that we got the whole team excited about the design system. So there have been points in the process where we have designs for our client to review or get approval on, and they're bought in. So there have been scenarios where they're like, if it matches the design system, we're on board. And that's really like an ideal place to be. Again, we were really lucky with an amazing client who, we really enjoyed and who also really got what we were trying to do here. Jerry, any other questions you'd like us to answer? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I had myself on mute. Sorry about that. So somebody was curious if you could talk a little bit about how the content in this case was managed in terms of the quality, especially with the timeline that was in place.
Yeah, great question. So, oh man, there's like a whole process we went through. We did a content inventory, a content audit to check the quality and understand what we needed to rewrite or remove. And the Peace Corps communications team had their own voice and tone guide and editorial standards that they maintained. So they really owned that part and ensured the quality. We helped support them on defining the governance that would work with that many content authors, but they're the ones who executed and maintained that. So what that meant was we were able to come in and say, hey, we've worked on giant sites with hundreds, tens of thousands of pages and 100 content authors. Here's what we've seen work. We recommend setting up, having an owner for this section, or we had a structure that we provided, and then ultimately they created that, they filled out that governance structure, and we sort of provided recommendations along the way. We also set up gather content and you can create workflows and gather content to say who's authoring, who's reviewing, and who's approving. And because we did that so early in the process, the governance was created, tested, and adjusted before the site even launched, because we could identify any issues in the workflow, while the authoring was happening. So those are a few examples of how governance, especially around content, was set up.
Gotcha. The next question is, this is really interesting. So with a design system that needed to support essentially a global site, how did the team account for cultural differences or even like localization in the design system?
Great question. We were just chatting with another group who asked us about localization, translation, stuff like that. We had a few things going for us that made it a little bit easier. All the pages are in English. We didn't have any translation to handle. The countries were able to input content in different languages on specific pages, but we didn't have like a mirrored site in another language. As far as the colors are a pretty big deal. Having the 4 options for color palettes was really key. And I think the other thing that we did was, or actually the Peace Corps team, once we had presented the options for the country pages specifically, they did a series of webinars where they reviewed designs and got feedback, and every single country office was invited to give that feedback. We really relied on the Peace Corps communications team and then also the content authors within the countries to give us that feedback and make adjustments early on. Amy, are there other things you'd add there?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. I mean, we were working with the advantage that all the applicants you do have to be a U.S. citizen to be apply for the Peace Corps, as I recall. And so there is that standard English language requirement, because it is when you get into languages that can be really difficult, especially when you're talking about different directions of reading styles. So we did have that advantage, but we accommodated for that by giving them customization in other ways so that they could still make it special for each one of their countries without having to worry too much about the language problem, which in the past has been a challenge.
Right. And since we are over time here, we will take one last question here, and this is a question that seems to always come up with design systems, and that question is, with this project, and I guess even at a larger scale, with all of the projects at Form 1, how do you guys determine when to update the design system?
Good question. Amy, do you have initial thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what Courtney was speaking about earlier. You have to really ask yourself a few questions about whether that's the right way to go. I mean, at the end of the day, it may be that your system needs to be evolved, and there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to do it in a strategic way. So really sit down with your team, talk about the needs that you're trying to meet, see if there's something that you've already built that'll work for whatever you need, or if there's a variation of something that you already have that's going to work. And if there's not, you can start to evolve that system so it does accommodate those new needs that pop up as you go. But it is something that you don't want to do necessarily on the fly. You do want to think really carefully and strategically about evolving your system so that it doesn't get out of hand, because the whole point is that it's a system and that it works well within itself. And we want to make sure that as you start to build it and as you start to evolve it, you're doing it in a way that is a benefit to the team and to the product and to the system itself, and it's not going to unravel your system as you move along. It's a very good question.
I would add that we can look to the branding sector and practice for the answer to this. I mean, if you look at how Coca-Cola's logo and brand has evolved over time, and other logos too, there are some companies where there are just slight adjustments that they're making over time to sort of move and translate into a different look and feel. There are others that, get rid of everything and start fresh. I think the same could be true for design systems. The benefit of it is that you get a foundation where you can slowly tweak those pieces over time. But often with branding, if it's logos specifically, a lot of times it's like maybe the organization just needs a refresh. Maybe they're targeting a totally different audience. Those are good reasons to rethink your brand, and your design system is included in that brand.
Right. And on that note, actually, we will close out the session. Courtney and Amy, thank you so much for joining us. You both did a great job presenting the case study and just discussing overall the benefits and process of design systems. And thank you to everybody here who came with great questions. And if you folks are interested in continuing the conversation, we do have a Slack team now with over 6,100 designers, developers, and product managers. And we have invited all the speakers to join the community as well. If you have over 3 years of experience on a product team, we do encourage you to apply. And so here is the link here, product-tribes.com, and hopefully we will see you there. And our next session is going to be the lunchtime demo. Today, our UX PIM product demo is going to be looking at how we improve collaboration and help automate the developer handoff process. So again, this is going to be a pure product demo. If you're interested at all in that topic, or you're facing that challenge in your team or organization, feel free to join us in just about 10 minutes here. And let me drop the link here. Oh, that link will work, but it's a little bit long. That is the Google link here. Here, let me get the short link. There we go. So hopefully we can see you folks there at that session as well. Otherwise, we will see you in the rest of the afternoon. We have 2 more sessions in the afternoon, and then that wraps up the 3rd day. Yeah, again, great job, Amy and Courtney, and everybody else. We'll see you later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right,
Bye.
take care.